Hey everyone, and welcome back to Stacey and Lisa's special show where we talk about all things sex. And today we're here to break down what good sex actually means. Believe it or not, there are many definitions of what good sex actually means based on your age and where you at in your relationship. So we're going to break down the myths we've absorbed from media, from porn, pop culture, and even really, really bad sex ed. So we're so excited to be back talking all things sex. Hey, Stace, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Lise. How about you?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's so important because sex means something different for everybody.
It does. It really does. I think, a lot of times it's the environment we grow up in. It's, watching the people who raised us, how they interacted. Some people came from single parents, so they didn't see the interaction. Only if a single parent brought home somebody. So they kind of learned on their own. Or that you have parents that maybe weren't intimate at all. So then, you kind of didn't really know what intimacy really was, if you don't see it in the house, if you don't see the hugging, the holding, the kissing, two people like sitting on one end of the couch all the time and not showing any
Mm.
affection for each other is kind of normal, if you see that all the time. So it all depends on your culture, where you grew up, who you grew up with, and then, as you get older, you look at society and you get ideas from either the media or TV, and you kind of create your own idea of what intimacy is for you. But sometimes you have to kind of dig deep, like, and really understand who you are and what your needs are, because everybody's needs are different.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I grew up with parents that I didn't see be super intimate often. Like I would walk into situations sometimes, the odd time when they were hugging and as a little kid, I was like, ew, gross. Um, but then they would watch movies and they'd be on separate ends of the couch, like you said. And so I really was just completely oblivious to relationships. I didn't even really think of it. And then you bring in like the TV shows that we're watching, like stuff like Beverly Hills 90210 and Sex in the City. And then as a young person, you see that and you're like, what the heck? Right. And then you're wondering, okay, what is this? So I'm curious, so what does sex actually mean to you?
To me, now at this stage of the game, I've come to the conclusion that sex is an act of intimacy. It's an act of two people showing each other affection, showing each other love, and trying to satisfy the other person. I kind of sometimes get annoyed when, people are just self-serving to themselves. A lot of times you see that in men too. They just want to get off. They just want to have sex
Hmm.
and they just want to feel good and have that moment where they have their little thing going on there. And, for women, we want to experience an orgasm too, but, it's supposed to be an act of pleasing each other. The thought of, yourself shouldn't even be in there. And I think that's a lot of times everyone's thinking about making themselves feel good. It's like
Mm.
you being attracted to the other person and really like wanting to have that moment of intimacy and just be able to just please them and love them and just have that urge to want to hold them in your arms and really give them all you got.
Yeah, and you know what I'm thinking right now is like even it's not even really about performance, but it's about like being present. Like
Yeah.
sometimes me and Matt will be trying to get intimate and I'm like thinking about work or I'm thinking about, I don't know, dinner or groceries. And then I'm like, whoa, 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 like you need to be in this moment. It's like the
Yeah.
moment you need to be focusing on each other. Enjoy this moment. This isn't going to last forever. Like, this is time for you both. And when I'm actually really present, I find that that's when, like, the best sex of my life actually happens because I'm in the moment and not in my mind. So that's really hard to do sometimes, though, especially with our busy lifestyles and all the competing factors, whether it be like someone knocking on the door or the kids making dinner downstairs and blocking out that noise. So hard to navigate.
Yeah, I agree totally. That was one of my biggest problems is sometimes I would just have my mind going in all different directions. And it's so hard to really enjoy sex or enjoy intimacy when your mind is not into it. You're just, there's a crazy amount of thoughts that go through our brain each day. I forgot the number, but if you're thinking about work and you're thinking about this and you're thinking about going downstairs and, I have to get this done, how are you going to enjoy the moment with the person that's next to you? How are you going to really, show that person and give that person everything you got and then be able to receive it and actually enjoy it? Because even if that person is performing well, if you're not there, you're just like in another world and it's just another, another time of having sex, and that's it. You have to be there in the present moment. You have to be really, taking it in, and the only way to do that is to clear your mind and figure ways to do that. And it's hard, especially for women. I hear all the time, it's very hard to relax yourself. And that was always a problem for me
Mm.
because my mind was always running rapid because I'm one of those people that like do a lot of things at once, multitasker. So it's like trying to clear my mind out and just trying to focus and just enjoy was really hard. Like I would use music and then I would try to put pleasurable thoughts, relaxing thoughts into my head and just try to get myself to that level of calmness where I could actually enjoy the present moment.
For sure. And like realistic expectations. I'm gonna go back in a time machine right now. But I remember like when I first started, tuning into porn or like seeing things on TV, and then I started having sex. I thought that that was what guys wanted. So I was like
Yeah.
performing all these like crazy things. And I remember this one time this guy says to me like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? Like this is kind of I like it this way." Like literally told me to like stop watching all this crap that I'm seeing, and like sex is so different from that. So
Yeah.
man, unlearning these societal expectations took a lot of time, but now I understand that like everyone is individual and everyone has different things that they like. And that brings me to the next point is like communicating that. And so we can have sex with our partner, but if we're not enjoying it, but we want them to do something, we need to be able to tell them that. So then there's
Yeah.
the emotional security part. So, oh my God, it's so multifaceted. Like there's so many dimensions to sex.
hmm There is so many dimensions to sex. It's like, there are so many times where people, I think that's one of the biggest problems is people don't communicate. They're either embarrassed to say what they want,
Hmm.
they're scared to say what they want, or it might be that that person's doing something that they don't like and they're afraid to hurt their feelings, and
Mm.
so they don't say anything at all. And so then they're not being satisfied. The
Hmm.
person is not having a great time and but the other person doesn't know that, and so if that consistently happens then the pleasure is going downhill, and that's when you see like a lot of people talking about like the flame starts to dim. Why is the flame dimming? Why is, I feel like, sex isn't what it used to be, and you talk, the flame is kind of going out. How do we rekindle this? Because in the beginning, everything was great because it was fresh and new. You're just
Mm.
meeting person, you're exploring the person, you're getting to know the person. But then as time goes on, you may not, and people change too, some of the things you may not like, or some of the things you may not feel good to you. But, how do you tell the other person, and or if you don't tell the other person, you're just not, it's not fulfilling to you. And that's when a lot of times relationships will go downhill and even breakups will occur because it could have been fixed, but the communication wasn't there.
Yeah. Like for you, you've been in this long-term marriage. And for me, my experience, I'm in a relationship right now. It's a really healthy, fulfilling one. And it's been about 3.5 years. But man, I was obsessed with him at first. And I just like
Mhm.
wanted to have sex all the time and like do all these things to please him. And then you get to the phase of like, all right, I'm not so obsessed anymore. Like,
Yeah.
does this mean that the relationship is not good anymore? But then it's like, no, that just means that we're evolving, we're growing closer. And so that's another misconception is like that desire of like wanting to like rip your partner apart and like jump on them and attack them. Like, I don't know, realistically, do you feel like that's always there? Like for me, I know that goes away. Like I still desire him, but it's in a different way. It's more of an emotional connection with the true intimacy versus the lust, I guess. I don't know. You're the expert. You're the expert in the long-term relationship. So tell us.
Well, I think it has to do with growing up and even our bodies changing. Like in the beginning,
Mm,
our, dopamine is like all up there,
yeah.
and we're really having a great time. We're getting excited. And then as you're with the person for a long-term period of time, you're getting to know the person. You're a lot of the things that you explored, and found out about the person, you already know, you know what to expect. You know a lot of things. And also your body's changing. Your libido's changing as time goes on.
Hmm.
You don't need it as much. When you're younger, you're just like your hormones are all over the place. You want it all the time.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
as you get older, you don't need it all the time. And then, your energy level starts to drop. You hear it all the time. Like if you're in a bunch of room with a bunch of women, a majority of the women will talk about, how they just don't feel as, that libido is the way it used to be, and that, they get tired easily and it takes a longer time for them to orgasm. So it takes
Mm,
more work, and sometimes they just don't have the energy because they know how long it's going to take them to get to that point. And so because it's going to take them that long, they don't want to, really have sex that day. They rather wait until they feel a little bit more energetic, and sometimes guys don't get that. And they, because guys could come all the time, it's easy. It just
totally.
takes them a couple of seconds, but for a woman, it takes them a while to get to that point where they
Hmm.
actually are, they feel excitable to that point where they could actually experience an orgasm. And a lot of women don't even experience orgasm. It's very hard for a
Yeah.
woman to experience orgasm. And some women I've talked to have never experienced
Hmm.
orgasm. So it's not, it's not an uncommon thing. Women talk about it all the time. If you're in a group of women and you give them all a glass of wine, they'll all start talking
Oh,
and talking about stuff
100%.
that they don't talk about, but it's very common. And if you're not gonna really, you don't have to have an orgasm to have a good time. You just want to, the point is just being loved and feeling
Mm,
loved back. Just that, you don't have to have sex. As you see, like there's couples that have been married for 50, 60 years and they're still holding hands and they still have that look of love in their eyes. It's
hmm.
they still love each other. Just that the touch of holding that person's hand, having them there, just being able to like remember the memories and really all the things they've gone through together in life and just still, experience every day new together. And just knowing that that person comes in and maybe makes you breakfast or, sits not
Mm,
next on the couch and puts their arm around you and you have maybe a positive conversation with that person. Believe it or not, that sometimes is satisfying for some women just as much as sex is. And for other
hmm.
women, no, they want to feel it. They want to get, down and dirty. They want to really have that moment of good sex. So it's different for everybody. It really is. Everybody, like we said in the beginning conversation, it's how you grew up. It's what you want, your expectations, your hormones. There's so many components that go into it. But it's like you have to figure out what you want. And then if you're not getting what you want, then you need to do something about it and figure out,
Mm,
is it me or is it the other person?
yes. And so, one of the things that came to mind when you were speaking was feeling like, you talk about sex and you talk about the man orgasming, and then women have a hard time with that. And yeah, 100%, it takes women a long time. So, do you feel like sex could, in my mind, I feel like when sex is over, that means that he's orgasmed and I've orgasmed. But I think you just like, I don't know, light bulb went off. Maybe that doesn't have to be the way. I mean, the other thing I'm thinking of is like, do you fake it to end it, or do you just say, "Hey, listen, I'm done." I don't know. How does that? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? What is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I've read an article about they did a study with a bunch of women, and I think it was over 60% of women fake it. And so it was
To
like
get
a
it over
really
with.
to
Get
get it
it
over with
over.
because they're just not feeling it
Oh
and
my God.
they can only stay wet and juicy for so long. And then
Totally.
then they're just like, you know what? I'm good. I had enough,
Putting
because
coconut oil by their bed. Just kidding.
exactly. Yeah. So, a lot of women do fake it, and so it's a very common thing. And if you're not feeling it and it's not great, it's like you don't have to keep going. You have to kind of do what you want to do. It's your body, and
Hmm.
it's like I think, sometimes women forget that. They want to please their partner so much that, you got to remember that's your body, and that's your sanctuary, and you need to treat yourself the way you want to be treated. So if you've had enough, you need to call the shots and say, "Hey, I'm done," because it's you. It's not the other person calling the shots. And some people feel obligated, like that they have to, they have to do this or they have to do that, or oh, this person does this for me, does that for me, or she does this for me and that for me, so I have to do this. And it's not true. It's what you want and what you need.
Yeah, so 100%. I know like when I get dinner cooked for me and like the dishes are done, I would take that over sex so many days out of the week. I'll tell you that right now.
I would do.
I like look up and I'm like, thank you. Like, yeah, it's amazing.
Yes. Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, definitely. It's anything can, everybody's different. Whatever brings you pleasure brings you pleasure, and I think it's just fabricated on TV and it's fabricated on
Mm,
the internet. And, people, just get the wrong impressions. And we talked about this in our last episode, like, just like people get the wrong impressions because our society makes it so much more than it is, and
oh
it's
my
nice to
God, yeah.
but realistically, that's not real.
No, and like even just like laying on the couch and like playing a funny game or just like making fun of each other and like laughing. Those are like so much better than intercourse sometimes, right? Like
Yeah.
true connection, having a deep conversation, getting the nerve to like ask something that's been bothering you and then resolving that. I feel like that positive movement in the relationship is comparable to an orgasm in a different way. Orgasms regulate the nervous system, but
Hmm.
so does resolving conflict. So it's like the same body response. It's just a different action. So you're right. I think it's our misconception about what sex is. You hear the word sex and you think, getting down and dirty, but yeah, there's so many ways you can have good sex, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah, and another topic was that a lot of women don't have the urge to want to have sex as much as they get older. And there are
Mm-hmm.
supplements like maca root. Oh my God, if you take that, you'll notice a difference. You'll start to feel like
Mm.
your sexual desire will definitely go up, for most women. I can't say all, but a lot of women that have taken the maca root, it has worked successfully. I've
Oh,
heard
wow.
a lot of positive things. I've taken it. It definitely works for me. It's a really good supplement, but everyone has to check to make sure it's okay, for them to take it if they want to take it. But for me, it worked, that's a great supplement. And then, just being able to, like, I hear women all the time complain that, as they got older, they got drier down below. And so then sex hurt,
Mm.
so if sex
Mm-hmm.
hurts, why are you going to want to do something that hurts? So there are plenty of lubricants out there, and you can even go to a functional medicine doctor, and they have specific lubricants with, things that will stimulate the clitoris, so you could actually get an orgasm. So,
Mm.
there are ways, to look into things like that. I always say a functional medicine doctor is great because a lot of times when women are experiencing problems when it comes to sex, they can go to a functional medicine doctor, they can get full blood works and figure out what hormones are not balanced, what's going on in their body, and they actually can do things naturally to actually stimulate their sexual desire, to stimulate orgasm. They even have the O shot and the P shot, and the O shot is
Mm.
great because the O shot, if someone is not stimulated and they're not able to get an orgasm or they just feel numb inside, O shot is when they go in, they actually withdraw blood from the clitoris and the vaginal canal. They take that
Mm.
blood and then they spin it, and then part of it becomes plasma, part of it becomes blood. They take the plasma, they re-inject the plasma into the areas where you can have an orgasm because there's a couple different spots. I believe is there three? I can't remember. I think there's about three. And so
Was
they
there like
will,
17? I'm seeing like all these like different pleasure areas.
I'm
Yes.
not It looks like a little spider. Well, I know that they hit the clitoris, and there's
Yeah.
there's one in the vaginal canal,
Mm.
and then they also have the vaginal canal. There's certain sensitivity areas that can stimulate
Hmm.
orgasm.
I think
So
that's what I'm
they
referring to. Yeah.
And so they hit like those areas, and those areas, it's like the Cinderella effect. So you have to, after that, you don't drink any alcohol, you stay clean,
Mm,
it starts to rejuvenate the tissues inside your vaginal walls, and so it becomes thicker, and you will notice that your clitoris will become more sensitive, and you'll actually start to, you'll start to have a really good feeling when you're having sex, and orgasms will come a lot easier. And
mm,
for men, they do the P shot when they experience erectile dysfunction, and the P shot has been very successful for lots of different men. And, men don't like to talk about it, but men in their
mm,
late 30s and up experience erectile dysfunction. And it's a very common thing. And, it happens all the time. And so
mhm.
that's one way of, going to a functional medicine doctor and, talking about the P shot is one way, just one way, because there's other things too that they could actually, conquer that problem as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we gotta talk to all the men who are listening. I was seeing a guy and he had a B12 deficiency, and he went to a functional medicine doctor and started getting B12 shots, and his issues were resolved. So yeah, just because you're not able to perform, it's not always like a serious issue. It could be something as simple as just, incorporating a certain supplement into your life. So, and it's
Yeah,
very common for men to have, dysfunction other than when they're drinking, which is, the
right.
joke that everyone talks about, right? But
Yeah.
men, just like women, struggle with, getting erections, and it's also normal. So we need to normalize that.
Yeah, it's really it's a common thing with men. They just don't want to talk about it because of their male
Mm,
ego, but it's something that a lot of guys go through, and most men will experience it as they get older, and there's a way to conquer that. And our bodies, our nutrient level goes down as we get older. So we have to, it's really smart just to even go to a functional medicine doctor to get blood work done just to see what vitamins, you're deficient in, because
mm.
that could a huge thing too. Sometimes it's just you have nutrient deficiency and in certain areas, and you just have to resolve those areas. It's, a lot of times we don't realize it, but the simplest things could be fixed very, just by doing a few things. Instead of just going to a doctor and getting a prescription for something and then having more problems later on.
Totally. There's so many side effects. I recall a time in my 30s where I wasn't in a relationship, but I'd always had a high sex drive.
Hmm.
And so I was, doing different things and pleasuring myself in those ways. But I went through a phase where I couldn't have an orgasm, no matter what.
Yeah.
And,
Hmm.
the joke was that my bean was broken, but it was detrimental. Like it was tragic. I was like
It is.
really scared and I didn't know what was going on. And I remember it was like week after week after week, and I was so depressed about it. And then one day
Oh,
it
yeah.
came back, but I don't even know why that happened.
Yeah. No, sometimes things are unexplainable. Sometimes things, happen in our bodies, and our bodies automatically try to start to heal itself. And during
Mm,
that process, you can go through things, and and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and the problem's gone, and you don't know
mm.
how, but
That was
your
a beautiful
body's
day.
there.
That was a beautiful
Yeah,
day.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. I had three C-sections, and my first C-section, the doctor was old school. And when he gave me my C-section, he did a terrible job. And he cut
Mm.
me, he tore one of my muscles. I had scar
Oh
tissue
my
damage
God.
outside the from the scar, and I lost my ability to have an orgasm, and everything went totally numb. And for the longest time, it was so hard because for a woman not to be able to feel pleasurable, it's not fair, and so, eventually I went to see a functional medicine doctor, and they did the O shot on me, and that's what brought it back. But
Oh
it
wow.
was a while before, I went to the doctor because I didn't even know about the O shot. It was
Right.
brought to my attention. But, during that time, it was terrible not being able to feel anything down below, not to have an orgasm, not to feel anything. And it was all because of that C-section. But, for years, I was feeling like that and I was going through that. And then once I got the O shot, the problem went away. But during that time, it's for a woman not to have to be able to not to be able to orgasm, not to be able to feel anything. That's a horrible feeling.
It is a horrible feeling, and I can't help but to think like how strong women are. You just talked about having three C-sections and, going through that and not being able to have an orgasm after that because your body needed to repair itself and you needed to rejuvenate those things. Like, man, women are just so strong. Men, I don't think men could handle it sometimes.
No, men can definitely not handle it. No
Oh
way.
my
That's why
God.
I made it so women could have kids and not men because I don't think men can handle it. They get a little scar on their finger and they're all upset. So
Yeah, the man. Let's talk about the man cold. The man cold. Oh my Lord.
yeah.
So
Oh my.
why don't we touch a little bit on like body confidence and
Hmm.
then we'll end our episode for the day. But like I know at different points in my life when my body was going through changes, I recovered from an addiction. I gained a lot of weight after that and I like was so self-conscious for a little while. And so when I was going to be intimate with someone, I wanted it to be dark. I wanted to be under the covers because I went from being like super fit to,
Yeah.
being 60 pounds heavier and
Yeah.
not feeling good about myself. So that was really, really difficult to go
Yeah.
through, you know? But then,
Mhm.
like someone told me, you just have to be comfortable with who you are. But it's easier said than done, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I started perimenopause at like 39. I didn't even know what was going on. And then I started going into menopause. A functional medicine doctor was able to give me hormones, balance my hormones so I wouldn't go
Mm,
into menopause. But, I was gaining the extra weight. One day I looked in the mirror and I had hips and my belly and I always had that little belly from having kids. And there
hmm
were times where you get self-conscious about your imperfections, and sometimes people don't even realize it, like, oh, you look great, but you look in the mirror and you know what you can look like. And then, and then it's like, I had certain areas that were not muscular that I used to be muscular and I was gaining weight in certain areas. And that's not what I wanted for myself, and I knew I could look better. I knew, and then it's very hard. The older you get, the harder it is to lose the weight. It's easier said than done. And they throw all these great, diets out there and all these tricks of the trade and all these supplements and stuff like that. But really, it really takes a lot of work, even with the exercising and even with the eating right and stuff like that. You do a couple of days of going back to your old styles and habits, and for me, those pounds would come right back on, or my
hmm
body would be sensitive to certain ingredients and foods that I didn't even know were in there, and I would blow up. I could retain 12 pounds of water from something I ate and then lose that
Wow.
12 pounds, after a couple of days. And it's all has to do with something that was in one of the foods. But during that time,
Wow.
I would look at my trimester, and it was like, you look in the mirror, and especially in the summertime when you want to go out in a bikini, and it's like, or you just put on a bikini that you had a couple years back, and you're looking in the mirror, it's like, oh shit, that doesn't look good on my fucking hips. I'm like, oh, look at my
Mm,
stomach, and it's like, it's frustrating. It's really frustrating for a woman, I think, I know for me, maybe, women, I know they have a lot, they were doing it for a while. I haven't heard it for a while, but they were, campaigning that big is beautiful, the body's beautiful, and this and that. And what, everybody has to be happy with themselves. But for me, I didn't like that campaign because for me, the first thing that I thought about was that, okay, if you're overweight, that opens you up to disease. You got
right.
high pressure, high cholesterol, heart attack, diabetes, possible strokes, so how could big be beautiful if it's going to cause all these diseases, and to me is like we have to do something about it. People need to take the initiative. If we don't like the way we look, we have to do something about it. And we may not be exactly the way we want. I don't think anybody's ever going to be exactly the way they want. But if we can make some kind of improvement, we need to just give ourselves credit and accept ourselves for who we are. You know, we're never going to be exactly the way we want. If I could be exactly the way I want, I'd have like maybe 5 more inches on me. I'd be 5 more inches taller, you know. I'd barely make 5'2", you know. I'd have a flat stomach and I'd look like have that model body. But I'm never going to be, 5'8". I'm never going to have that flat stomach, you know. So it's like, you know what? I'll go exercise, I'll get some muscle tone, and you know what? I buy clothes that just fit me the right way, that hides the places that don't look great and shows off the places that do. And that's the best you can do. And I always recommend that to people. Sometimes I see people go out in the street and they're wearing clothes that, you know what? If you have a stomach and it's a pretty big stomach, you don't wear a half t-shirt. It's just like you wear
Mhm.
this clothes that complement your body. And by doing that, actually, you actually make yourself look better and you
Yeah,
actually hide the things that aren't perfect. You know what I mean? So, it's all about how you portray yourself. You can easily hide the flaws. You could easily work on yourself, and it's you're never going to look exactly the way we want to. But we can make efforts and try, but don't beat yourself over the head because you're not exactly the way, you picture yourself. Because just, people like that, they starve themselves. They live lives. I know people that have like lost tons of weight and it was because they practically starved themselves. And as soon as they stopped, they gained the weight back. And then I knew people who went on these crazy diets and they lost a lot of their hair because their body went in shock. And so is it really healthy? If your body goes into shock, your body's saying, yo, this isn't working for
mhm,
me. Do
totally.
things naturally in moderation and just love yourself for who you are. And just use common sense. Common sense is key.
For sure. And I just want to say, like, confidence is effing sexy. Like,
Yeah.
confidence is sexy. So when
Oh, yeah.
you're prioritizing your health, when you're putting the right things in your body, when you're doing things for yourself, when you feel good about what you're doing, your purpose, your job, and you truly love yourself and you can hold your head up high, confidence is the sexiest thing on your body, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%, 100%, because a lot of people lack confidence in our society. And
The
you know what?
prettiest
Everybody,
girls sometimes, the prettiest girls, I'll be talking to
yes,
someone and it's like, I'm like, oh my God, this woman is like absolutely gorgeous. And she's so self-conscious. And I'm like, whoa, like it's such an eye opener. Like mental health is such a topic for another day, but so
yeah,
real. And so this person who I perceive as looking perfect, quote unquote
yeah,
perfect, is so self-conscious, right? And
yeah.
it always boggles my mind.
It really does. Like I've met someone and I was talking to her and she had the greatest body. I'm like, and I complimented her because she's in her midlife, and she has this
Mm,
amazing body and she works for
banging.
it. And
Yeah.
when I gave her a compliment, I'm like, oh, you got the greatest bod. I said, I wish I could do what you do. She's like, no, I don't. No, I don't. And she
What?
did not see herself as, pretty and she didn't see herself with this great bod. And I'm like, you have an amazing body. I said, I could not go to the gym and do what you do. I said, we're almost the same age. We're only a few different years apart, and I can't do a quarter of what you do. I said, you should give yourself kudos. I said, you look amazing. And she's like, no, I don't. No, I don't. She just didn't see it. And I'm like, how could you not see it? People, it's so important. I think people, that's one thing they should have taught in school. Fucking confident classes,
Mhm.
confidence because a lot of times it goes back to our childhood and I'm not this is another topic for another day, but confidence goes back to how we grew up, what people said to us, things that that really stuck with us. But you know what, you could change that. I didn't have confidence in my younger days. I worked at it and got confidence.
Mhm.
I am today because I worked at it. I saw the flaws and I worked to try to improve those flaws. Women have to give themselves more credit and don't listen to what other people say. It's what you think about yourself and really look at, maybe people need to write a list of all the great things they do and all the great things
Totally.
about their body, things that they like, and if they can't figure it out, let a friend write all the great things
Mm.
about them and then give it to them.
That's so awesome. So awesome. I love that. Yeah, it's just crazy. And Yeah, it comes down to mindset and what we tell ourselves. We have to stop attaching emotion to what other people are saying about us, and what other people think and perceive is based on their experiences in life and has nothing to do with who we are.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to learn that skill. That's where the
Yeah.
mindset comes in, and knowing those things and being able to like go into your brain and say, no, this isn't right. This isn't real. This isn't mine. And then detach from it.
Exactly. Yes, and that's key. The word you just said, detach from it. Detach
Mm.
now, and that's hard for
I'm
people to do.
I'm picturing like flipping my hair and spinning on my heels and like being like just giving them the finger.
Yeah, exactly.
God. Yeah, it's so tough. It's so tough. Well, it was so fun talking about what good sex actually means with you.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I think people have, it's all what people like, there is no standard, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
agreed.
It's what, the person likes and what the person wants. And if there's something the person's not getting, well, you know what, whether you're single and you're with somebody, hey, say it. It's how we say it. You know what I mean? You say it so you don't offend the person, maybe give them a cute little hint, wow, I really like this, and see if the person goes for it. Or if you're married, do the same thing, it's how we ask, how we say things. But you know what? Everybody has their own perception of sex, and don't try to live your life through your partner. Live your life for
Mm,
you. I hate seeing
totally.
that because I see people always trying to please their spouse. You know what? It's
Mm.
not always about pleasing your spouse. What pleases you? And that's my take.
Codependency is a real thing. Codependency is a real thing. You're right. Um, this has been so fun. And to our
Yeah.
audience, thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys have any questions or additions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And on the next episode, we'll definitely get to them and touch on them for you because we are open and we like to talk sex.
Yes, and we'd like to answer any of the questions you have, just like Lisa said. And listen, if you have any suggestions, if you want us to talk about specific topics, write them down in the comment box. Say, hey, I'd love to hear you guys, your views on this topic or that topic. If we really think it's a cool topic, you're going to hear us talk about it. So mention it and, let us know what you think. And follow us. And don't forget to subscribe because the more you subscribe, the more you'll get of us. And we want you guys to join the party and be our supporters and our little cheerleaders on the side. And we want to help you guys too and make this a fun event. So follow us and subscribe to us and ask your questions and give your comments. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
I want to hear what you guys have to say too. And I always love hearing what you have to say, Stace.
Same here, Lise.
All right, girl. Until next episode, we'll see you later.
All righty.